So thank you for joining us, Jeremy and Alecia from Singapore, from a different time zone, and also to Lada and Lachlan. This has been a really very special project, one of the first few of its kind in Sydney. So Presence of Mind, the exhibition, for those of you who haven't had the chance to look, to actually visit the exhibition either online or in person, it's really a show that looks at the intersection of contemporary art practice and Buddhist practice. Now, in the past, there have been exhibitions both here and overseas about contemporary art that is, inspired or influenced by Buddhist thinking. So we're not so much talking about iconography per se, or ideas to do with, it's not a religious art exhibition, so to speak, but really the focus is on, some of the core concepts and tenets of Buddhism and how that really sort of interweaves and is really relevant to contemporary art practice and contemporary life. So today, excuse me, we're really looking at two key ideas, which is, the notions of impermanence, and also the idea of compassion, which is really very important in this time, and how that really translates to mind and matter, as it's realized in art practice. And of course, the four artists with us here today have very specific and different practices. Can I just temporarily get, I don't know if you're familiar with doing that, a show of hands? You can kind of raise your hands virtually, or you probably can't, or in chat. Is there anyone who hasn't seen the exhibition? Or maybe perhaps the easiest way I'll do this is we've actually got this wonderful virtual walkthrough version of the exhibition that we've just launched yesterday evening. And what we'll do right now is to share screen and show you. Just 1 second. What it looks like, and then we can actually then refer back to the works by each artist. Okay. So this is the exhibition as it is in Gallery Lane Cove. Because we are looking at the works of specific artists, I will start with Lada's work, which actually begins here with, we're kind of backtracking a bit. So this is a rear view, really. So you can see here, this is Lada's work, and it's like this wonderful hanging garden of embroidery, but it's not really about embroidery, is it, Lada? I might actually direct my first question to you, Lada. Do you want to talk about your work in the context of today's discussion?
Sure, I'll give it a go. Okay, well, I'm Lada. I'm a visual artist. I do work in sound at the moment, but I work in textiles, and my main focus is art tied with neuroscience. Now, I'm also a student of Buddhism, so of course Buddhism informs all of my work. Now, this specific work is about gut bacteria and the way we share gut bacteria, and the opportunity for altruism through the shared microbiome. So we colonize our spaces with, as we now know, viruses and bacteria and other microbes from within us. But we can actually use that in a compassionate way to help the people around us, or to not harm them as well. For example, this work started way back in Malaysia, pre-pandemic. So I wasn't thinking about viruses at the time, but everything evolves, as we know. So it mainly started as looking at altruism, but now it's also looking at altruism of not just sharing, but not sharing.
Thank you. So just connecting through, can you talk a little bit more about the idea of altruism, because we can connect that quite nicely to compassion, which is quite central to Buddhist practice.
Sure. So
a little bit more on that.
Yeah, the idea for the work actually came I was giving a talk on neuroscience and just happened to mention nutrition and the importance of the enteric nervous system. So the gut has more neurons in it than the spinal cord, for example. So it's a gut-brain axis, but the gut is called the second brain. And afterwards in the Q&A, a woman actually approached me even after the Q&A and said that her son has autism and will only eat little sausages, which aren't the most nutritious food and also not the best for promoting gut health. And she asked me, what can I feed him? And I said, well, you feed him little sausages and then find a dietitian in the meantime. But what you can personally do is eat a very rich diet in vegetables and other pre and probiotics, and therefore you will be helping your son's gut microbiome. So there's this kind of element of compassion and altruism towards her son without even his knowledge, and he still gets to eat the only thing he's eat. So yeah, I guess there's so much opportunity. As I said, Buddhism informs every part of my work, but also my life. And so the moment that I'm faced with a conundrum, like what can my son eat? It had to come back to compassion. It had to come back to altruism and not this kind of harsh idea of your son should do this. I'd like to just cite a couple of sources if possible. So if anyone is interested in looking into the idea of altruism, there's a wonderful book by Matthew Ricard called Altruism. And there's also For the Benefit of All Beings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And if you want to look into the science a bit more, Australia is the centre for this research with the Food and Mood Institute at Deakin University, headed by a woman, Professor Felice Jacka. So I strongly recommend if anyone's interested in the science behind this work to take a look into their work, because it's quite remarkable.
Thank you, Lada. It's quite fascinating. What I might do is once we stop screen sharing, if you could type in any of these references or suggestions to look into in chat, and people can sort of copy and paste that if they were,
I'll give it a go.
Explore that further. Thank you. But and also saying it's quite interesting that your work looks at the intersection of art, science, and Buddhism, and you're talking about the mind, and of course, in this case, that sort of mind-brain conundrum and the gut being brain. And really, of course, mind, as we know, is the center of everything, really. But that's one way to look at, and to visualize compassion, in a kind of sort of microscopic way, to a room-size installation that's representative of, the sort of gut ecosystem, if you like. But I'm just going to move on to Alecia now and ask, because Alecia, your work is actually talking about, compassion in a kind of from a different lens. So let's just move on to Alecia's work. Alecia, would you like to start with Care Index, or would you like to start with Goddess of Mercy? Because Alecia has two works in this show.
Well, I think maybe we'll start with Goddess of Mercy, because I think that's quite a nice background to my practice also. And then after that, I could share the Care Index, which some of the practitioners in this show have also been involved in. So I think that'd be nice to chat about later.
I do want to apologize to the audience, because I think we've got a bit of a glitch. The video is meant to play at the same time. You can see. So what we've got here is a 2-channel video installation, very close to each other. Alecia, you might be able to explain what was your idea behind having them so close together, and a little bit more about the story behind this work.
Yeah, so actually this, I was really happy to be approached to show this work, because it was done quite some time ago in 2012. So about 10 years ago. And this video project really came out of a response to an earlier show that I did on Dr. Lachlan, who you can actually see in one side of the video, the panel on the right side. So Dr. Nathan is actually a very prominent feminist as well as medical doctor in Singapore, and particularly in the 60s and 70s. And I had the opportunity to work on a site-specific installation in her home in 2011. So that was kind of the inspiration for this work, because I was very interested in the legacy that she had, advocating for women's rights, but also in the later stage of her life, she lived with Alzheimer's disease, and so a lot about that site-specific work was responding to this idea of memory and what happens when our body ages, right? And in the way you become someone else. And so this particular work, Goddess of Mercy, allowed me to reflect upon some of the observations I had through Dr. Nathan's life and her family, as well as it was a coming together of my own experiences at home, because during that time, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was also observing a lot of her daily rituals and how she was also grappling with mortality. So I think this work was very personal in that sense. I was really sort of drawing from the lives of people that I knew, and also through the way that they were living, trying to understand what does it mean to have a body, what does it mean to deal with loss, as well as what does it mean to create rituals that sustain us. Yeah, so this work looks at that through mothers and sons. So not just this sort of family relationship, but also the everyday kind of gestures of care and gestures of sustenance, right? And also Lada talked about nourishment. So I think this this video work tries to capture that through the lives of four very different people, but are yet tied together through family, and also tied together through their sense of loss as well as mortality. Yeah, so yes, this was this work, Goddess of Mercy. And yeah, sorry, Rachel.
And Alecia, of course, this iteration and this very, new iteration of your work is quite different from its original version, which was really a representation of altars. And can you talk us through a little bit more about, how this has shifted in this version in terms of that 2-channel projection?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. So actually, when this show was first staged in 2012, it was shown in Singapore's substation, and it was for the Fringe Festival. So the gallery that I worked with at the time was very long, and I wanted to create sort of 2 living room spaces. So the 2 projections that you see right now were actually shown on small, much smaller TV screens in a living room kind of setting, and they were facing each other. So it's kind of like these 2 stories have a dialogue with each other, and the sound work and the sound experience was also quite different in that space.
I apologize, we can't get the sound playing while we're having this conversation.
It's okay. Yeah, so I think this was interesting for me to have this chance to present this work completely differently, without the installation of the living rooms, without the small altars and photographs. So in a way, this is a much sort of simpler, minimalist kind of like presentation of that work, which I feel kind of allows me to approach it quite differently. And yeah, so I'm really happy about the opportunity to kind of resurface this work after 10 years.
Thank you. And we're just going to move on to Care Index. I'm not sure if we can get that playing. Just 1 second.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, if it doesn't play, I can put in the link for the work.
Might
So
be a bit tricky from a distance. I might stop share and ask you to just show it as a straight video. Is that all right? But in the interest of those who haven't been able to or can't visit the exhibition in person, that's how it's presented, you know, as on a screen with headphones on. But Alecia, maybe I'll stop share and you can just proceed to share with us. Yeah.
okay, so maybe I'll share our website actually, which also shows the. Are you able to see my browser? Okay, so I've been working on this project called the Care Index. It was pretty much a response to COVID, and I was thinking a lot about how, you know, sort of this social distancing that all of us are experiencing in different parts of the world has limited our social contact, and how might I as an artist respond to that sort of isolation? So I started a research project called the Care Index that's still ongoing. And since last year, so early last year, I've been sort of working with different groups to collectively think about care gestures and how these gestures can actually be shared with people who are strangers. You know, is it possible to actually connect with others through sharing of embodied gestures that are, you know, very personal to us? And so during this project, you know, with Presence of Mind, I had the opportunity to work on a digital residency with some of the artists from Singapore and Australia. And I think it's really quite special in the sense that each one of the contributors really brought in different perspectives from their own Buddhist practice as well as art practice. And we kind of approached it through several broader themes that we've been thinking about through our work. So one of them is actually this idea of initiations, right? You know, how do we, you know, how have we encountered initiations? And then the other aspect is dwelling. You know, what does it mean to dwell in place? You know, what does it mean to feel a sense of belonging? And then the last sort of topic that we looked at as a group was departures, right? So I think in that discussion, you know, a lot of us talked about death rituals, and also how do we approach aging and the body in quite varied ways. And how do
sorry, go on, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So in this process, it was, I would say that the research was kind of facilitated by myself as well as the different practitioners in the group. And we would offer each other exercises to try out, you know, whether it's breathing exercises, meditation exercises, or, you know, certain body movements to explore some of these ideas. So I would say the Care Index is kind of like a collective thinking space. And with each group is very, very different. So for this particular show, what we've actually created for the exhibition is a collective score. So each practitioner who was part of this residency has created a personal score in response to one or two of the themes that was shared or discussed during the show. And so these are some of the outcomes that you can actually watch in the exhibition itself or online. So Rachael, would you like me to play a little bit of it or, okay.
Oops, yes, please. You might just want to, you know, scan through it with a selection, and people can look at the online version on our website at a later time.
Yeah, so I think one of the invitations from the artists is also for audience members to actually respond to some of these video scores that we've created. You'll see when you take time to watch this pretty extended video, that each score is preceded by a little title as well as an instruction that's provided by the artist. So you are very welcome to have your own interpretations to it, and also share it with us via the CareIndex website.
Would you like to show them the first one very quickly, just so they have a
is it not playing? Because I was playing on the, okay. Sorry, because it's playing on my browser, but.
It's playing now.
Is it playing now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I guess it doesn't work when it's playing full screen, so. I'll just like skip a little bit through so you can see a little bit of variety of the different kind of scores that the artists have contributed. This particular one that's playing now is by Christina Ma, and the earlier one, which you saw kind of like under this papery membrane, that's by Cindy. I'll just pause here. Yeah, so there's actually quite a number of scores that are connected in this Vimeo. So yeah, maybe later I can share the link in the chat group so you guys can take a look at your own time.
Thanks, Alecia.
You're muted, Rachael.
I'm just going to go back to the video, to the online version of the show, and move on to Lachlan's, because in the exhibition, the Lachlan's is the next one. Sorry. Okay, so let's move on to Lachlan's. Through Lada's work, thank you, Lada. Okay, so you can see Lachlan's work here. So Lachlan has two works in this show. So the first are two works on the wall. And then there are these very interesting clay cups, which I'll leave you to tell our audience about right now before we delve deeper. Lachlan?
Okay, thank you. I'm unmuted here. What I might do is just read the, I actually don't have the text in front of me. I've got it on the screen. I'm just going to
okay.
There we go. So I'll just read that. I should start importantly that I'm speaking from Wongal and Durrag country, and part of the work was made in Western New South Wales on Wiradjuri land. I'd also like to just quickly acknowledge, acknowledge the passing today of Thich Nhat Hanh, which I think is a profound moment for Buddhists, particularly in Australia, because he's had such a profound effect. And a gesture of gratitude, Gasho, to Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay, so this piece is firstly the text on the wall, which reads, "Each cup is made of grave clay from either Rookwood or Trangie cemeteries. Each cup is different. Some are smaller or larger, wider, taller, rougher or smoother. Some may have a different colour or a different glaze inside. One cup in particular may speak to you, and if you would like to, please take it home." So the piece consists, in a sense, of, around 250 cups, of which probably 20 or 30 are on display at any one time. And people who interact with the piece are hopefully encouraged, feel welcome to find one of the cups that they think actually speaks to them, find their cup, as I like to think of it, and then of course take it home with them. Knowing of course, that it comes from clay that has been taken from a grave excavation at either Rookwood or Trangie cemeteries. Now, Rookwood is the biggest and the oldest cemetery in Sydney. It's apparently the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a very large, picturesque, late 19th century cemetery, about 4 or 5 kilometres from where I live. Trangie Cemetery is where my father, my grandparents are buried, and some other relatives probably that I don't even know about. The grave doesn't come from their particular grave diggings. It comes from, in a sense, the most recent grave that was dug or being dug at the time when I was able to get the clay and process it. So I get the clay from Rookwood or Trangie. The clay is, I bring it back to my studio, to my backyard, where I process it to some degree or other, depending how I feel about the clay, and then just basically sit and make little cups. They're just little hand-formed pinch pot type cups, influenced certainly by the Japanese Chowan tradition of ceramics, which I adore. They're nowhere near as good as the Japanese masters, of course, but I do acknowledge that they have a kind of influence on me. And then they're displayed simply on a shelf. It was really interesting on opening night watching people interact with the piece, some very hesistant about actually taking a cup or even touching a cup, because you're not supposed to in general, which is a good thing, you know. If everybody touched some artworks, that kind of ruined them. So that makes sense to some degree, but it allows people to interact with a piece in a slightly different way than they normally would.
But Lachlan, I might just add quickly that there is definitely that element of uncertainty, because it is made with clay from cemetery. So there's certainly the element of hesitation, because this is, is it disrespectful? It might be a bit strange, a whole host of different sort of responses can come up depending on the individual's background. But again, it sort of comes back to the idea of impermanence, doesn't it, Lachlan?
Yes, and I was talking on the opening night to a person, and a particular person, and she found it quite distressing because she had a relative recently died, and the idea of taking a cup at that point for her was just too difficult. I said, absolutely fine. If you don't want to take one, I'm not forcing anybody to. But in a sense, for me, they're like memento mori. They are a memento of death, but not hopefully in a macabre way. It's about living with death. I mean, there are extreme examples of that in the Buddhist traditions, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, when they make skull cups, but also a lot of other practices in various traditions of Buddhism speak to that impermanence, to, in a sense, an awareness of death. I wouldn't say comfort's perhaps not the right word, but I think, just an acceptance that this isn't our inevitability. It's the Buddhist equivalent of ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We can't kid ourselves thinking we're going to last forever. We ain't, and I'm feeling that every day of my 61 years at the moment. So that's the kind of impetus that I was playing around with in this piece, and I have to say, to the credit of Rachael and Kath, when I first sort of proposed this piece, they were all for it. But also because of COVID, it had some time to, for want of a better word, mature. So I'm sort of happy with its final form, because the different iterations of how it could be displayed and interacted with. So I'm sort of, I think it's a good resolution for me at this point. So I'm happy with it. Oh, and the text is written in clay. So it's clay with acrylic medium mixed together. That clay comes from Trangie Cemetery. So I took some of the clay, processed it very finely. So it's almost like terra sigillata, very fine clay, which is just painted very slowly and carefully onto the wall so people could actually read it. I should note my handwriting is generally close to illegible, so I tried really hard to make it legible.
Now, Lachlan, do you want to talk about its relation to these two works here, or about the two works first before you talk about how they...
Sure. So the other two works are sort of the latest iteration of a project that I've been working on for 6 years now, on and off, thinking about suffering, dukkha, in a sense that the reason for being of Buddhism, as I understand it, and how that can be imaged or imagined without actual suffering. Because I worked with a performance artist many years ago who was very much into working with suffering, and he actually made himself suffer in a really big way. I won't go into all his work. It was amazing, but very difficult. And I kind of thought that there was enough suffering in the world. We didn't have to make more. There's plenty of it if we're aware of it. So I wasn't interested in that kind of actual lived experience suffering. These are a metaphor of suffering. Mm-hmm. In the Buddhist texts, the Pali Suttas, which really fascinate me still, the Buddha uses a lot of visual imagery, words to conjure up visuals, and his way of getting us to understand suffering is to understand that we're on fire, that we're in a kind of a perpetual burning with greed, hatred, and delusion, of course, the poisons of Buddhism. And that's, as a metaphor, I thought, well, I'll work with that to start with. So I burnt a whole bunch of things in all sorts of sort of odd ways to try to play with it. And then by just playing around with stuff and this is all used cardboard. Thank you to Harvey Norman, a big furniture show in Sydney. The cardboard that these things are made of comes from furniture boxes from them. So I started burning cardboard, which I thought was visually sort of interesting, but not. And then I've always had a proclivity to things a bit sort of shiny and brassy. So I started gilding it. So they're actually gilded with Dutch gold. It's not real gold, it's like metal gold, which is then shellacked and so forth. And then they're just a lot of experiments with burning that material to get images. The imagery, the people in the image are actual sitters of various groups. And over the years, I've asked various groups to pose for me, and I just take a silhouette image to work from. So I want it to be actual people, not real specific people in the actual work. Nobody knows who they are except me. And
just out of curiosity, are those sitters Buddhist practitioners as well?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So in the early iterations of this work, I actually asked, I was doing three-dimensional standing burnt figures, and they were I asked a bunch of monks and nuns and lay practitioners to pose for me to allow me to capture their silhouette. Just because it was interesting working with that idea in groups, Buddhist groups, say, this is what I'm trying to do, what do you think? And get really interesting feedback and comments. And I have to thank, all the groups that I worked with over the years have been very, very cooperative, and they find it fascinating. It's a little bit weird, but okay, we'll do it, which is wonderful. So they're not supposed to be individual people, named people. They're sort of generic shapes of human beings, some sitting in various positions. The one on the right is sitting very close to a kind of a meditation position, and it looks, kind of like a Buddha figure, and that's okay. One of my the kind of talismanic quotes of my life is one from the Zen tradition, which is, if you see Buddha, kill him. And also, of course, Chogyam Trungpa's cutting through spiritual materialism. So I don't get hung up on imagery or kind of getting too sacred about these things. I think a healthy kind of play with that is useful. So that's where those figures come. I don't see them necessarily relating in a very direct way to the cup piece. They're quite different. And I'm very glad that Rachael and Kath allowed me to put them on a black wall because just it looks really nice on a black wall. It looks really interesting and rich because of that. The burning really comes out on a black wall. But I think it's good that they're on black and white walls separately. But I don't see, they're all in the Buddhist mix, but I don't see them necessarily playing off each other particularly. People may see that, and that's fine.
I guess from a curatorial point of view, and the fact that it talks about suffering, and suffering may or may not always lead to death, and the whole idea of impermanence and creating a healthy distance from, you know, what causes suffering. I guess for us, that is the kind of connection, but that's something that I, you know, will be good to flesh out in discussion as we are doing now, because it's not always, you know, immediately obvious to people walking through the show necessarily. So thank you. Now, speaking of gilding, if you know, you're happy with what you've talked about, your work, I'm just going to move on to Jeremy's work, which also has an element of shine and gold, Jeremy. So let's move on further into the exhibition space, if you allow me. Sorry, I hope it doesn't make anyone dizzy. Can be a little bit at times, but oops, might have to do this from a particular angle. So we're just going to do this from a distance first, just to make sure that everyone can see what it is. So it's a very intricate installation of several pieces of gilded works. I'm not going to reveal it yet because Jeremy, I'll let you do the talking. And if you're all comfortable with that view, we're just going to zoom in right now into the detail. And Jeremy, you can take over and talk about this work.
So this work is, how should I put it? Like a bookmark of my journey into Buddhism. And it's these laser cut lettuces came from another previous work that was done in Boston in 2005, before I was embarking on a journey back home to Singapore. And Kath and Rachael was very kind to allow me to kind of reappropriate them and kind of create a new piece of work, which is now being gilded with 24 karat gold leaf.
Yes, real gold.
So it's a combination of like the kind of changes I've gone through in terms of my art practice, from contemporary practice, mainly collaborative, mainly research-based work, to more tempo-based work that was started off with learning gilding in Taiwan because of a need to fulfill some of the kind of holy object projects by my spiritual teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in some of his projects around the world. And I was, so that's how kind of the gilding came in, because it's a practice that became very meditative, because in order to make sure that the goal is reflecting the shine, you need to really get a kind of understanding of the materiality of the glue and also the surfaces that you're kind of working on. So going into a bit of a technical detail about the work, originally I had a different set of lattice designs, and it ran into some technical difficulties because you know, working with paper is kind of a new process, you know, using the correct glue, and for this for the gold leaf as well. So this is a slightly different iteration from the the one I had shown the curators before. But I'm very happy with this version because I was thinking a lot about this whole idea of what does it mean to practice Buddhism, practice meditation, and also particularly some of the more sacred Tibetan traditions in terms of initiated meditations on the deities, and how also in terms of this notion of emptiness, how do we go to a state of nothingness, not nothing physically, but a state of mind that is connected to emptiness. So the work for me is one of the smallest scale work I've ever done, very personal, very intimate, and also very cathartic in the sense that it brought out a lot of memories of how I became a Buddhist, practicing meditation, and also, doing some of the more holy, sacred objects, projects around the world. Yeah.
And Jeremy, thank you for that. There's quite an interesting abstract quality as well. So I'm not sure if you can see for people. I think because with this 3D walkthrough version, you can't really get away with those because we've kind of lit them in a specific way, but it does look quite like, for example, well, it's called a windowless front, isn't it? Walking into a windowless front, but really the slight irony is they do look reminiscent of windows. So do you want to speak a little bit about that, Jeremy?
Yeah, because we live in such a physical world, no matter how hard our mind wants to remove the materiality of this reality, somehow the physicalness of things still exists. So this is the best I can do in terms of my own practice currently, in minimizing and eliminating materiality need of fulfilling this ego-ness mind to sustain this existence. And it is a kind of a balanced, accepted state of acceptance of the current state of mind. And it's also a representation of how when you return to the pure state of materiality, if that makes sense, meaning the goal as just the goal, the paper just as the paper. If you actually pick up the laser cut pieces and you flip it behind, it actually reveals the actual piece of paper. I did not, originally I had contemplated whether should I gild the whole thing, so cover it up in gold, right? And then it looks fully gilded. But I thought I should leave traces of what the true nature of this material is, beyond its external kind of embellishment. So for me, that's how I think it's a state of mind, state of my practice currently in terms of negotiating, what does it mean to be existing as an artist, existing as a person living with certain health conditions, right? And also, and just a state of being, yeah.
Thank you. So now at this point, I'm going to just pose a question that will be great for the artists to take turns to respond to. I mean, you don't have to all do it, but it'd be nice to have a few different points of view. So now let's kind of zoom out to a broader perspective. How do you see, you know, the notion of mind and compassion and their importance in terms of, you know, creative practice? Do you see them as being quite critical? And I'm opening this question to our artist panelists.
I'll start if you, just to keep the thing going, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lachlan.
If I were going to talk about mind and compassion, they are intimately linked, but I think it's more productive to separate them for a moment or two, and then we can find connections. But I think compassion is something that a lot of artists for quite a number of decades, particularly I think in the West, because I think the art industry, for want of a better word, was a fairly cold and miserable place in the on the compassion stakes. That's a judgment, I know, but from my experience at art school and stuff, it wasn't about compassion. That wasn't a word we kind of used on everyday studio lessons, or in a sense where we were going as young wannabe artists trying to make it, whatever that was. So compassion, I think, is something that has come to the fore over a number of decades in, you know, particularly kind of performative practices like Alecia's, and to a degree to objects. And I think of people like Rickard, even Martin Creed, of in a sense giving the work away in a very literal sense as well as a metaphoric sense, as acts of compassion, of saying, here is a way we can make our work more compassionate, because as a society in the West, and art to some degree is a reflection or a kind of avant-garde for the society. It's not a pretty picture, I don't think, in a lot of ways. For me, it has been somewhat dissatisfying at a lot of time, in a lot of cases. So it's wonderful to bring back, in a sense, to try to bring back compassion in little ways here and there. And that is, I think, is connected to mind to the obvious degree, is that we are aware of I am to some degree aware of what's going on around me, awareness of mind, and therefore how do you act? Well, the only act that makes any sense from a Buddhist perspective is to try and act compassionately. The art world can be basically a really, to use a very gender-specific word, quite a bitchy place. So it's kind of nice to be able to say, wait a minute, let's try something else. And there are lots of wonderful artists who are doing some really great work on compassion, and some in this show, which is, you know, quite a number in the show. I mean, even to show in this kind of show is an act of compassion, because, you know, we're putting ourselves out there for the benefit of others, hopefully.
I have something to add to this, but before I do, can I invite any of the other artists to respond to either Lachlan or my question?
Just briefly, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, just briefly, I think that just the making of art, there's this level of benevolence. There's no guarantee you're going to make it or be able to show it or to speak about it or to have other people understand it. So I think that it's inherent in art making. So self-compassion as well as compassion for others. And yeah, it's quite tricky. There's some parts of the art world, similar to what Lachlan was saying, where we hold opportunities and don't share them with other artists. And I think that's changing. We go through waves. So, and currently it feels like there may be a wave of care for other artists who are also practicing. I do remember in art school on day one being told that by the end of year 3, only 50% of you will be left. And after 10 years after art school, only 2 of you will be practicing artists, and they'll be men. So, which isn't necessarily true. You know, I'm 20 years out of art school. But yeah, so I think things are changing. And a lot of that has to do with compassion in mind and care for our community and ourselves and our audiences as well.
I love to hear it from the Singapore artists and the Singaporean perspective. I mean, the reason for Kath and I was a little bit of a mastermind to sort of do a cross-cultural comparison was that, you know, there are kind of some similarities and obvious similarities and quite, you know, clear differences between Australia and Singapore. So Alecia, do you want to talk about, you know, your perspective in regards to this whole idea of mind, you know, the importance of mind, mindfulness, compassion, and art making, and what the landscape is like in Singapore, and Jeremy as well. So either one of you, you know, if you could respond to both, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think for me, like the kind of work that I would like to be part of, or to kind of learn from, are also in places that you know, allow for that kind of compassionate thinking and being. Yeah, because one of the things which you know, Lachlan was mentioning earlier on Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, right, which also had a very big influence for me. And so one of the teachings he always talks about is interbeing. And I think that sort of understanding that we're all interdependent is a very fundamental aspect of being compassionate, because if you don't see that kind of interdependence, it's very hard to maybe, you know, feel that you necessarily need to be compassionate to others. So yeah, I mean, I feel that for art practitioners or anyone for that matter, you know, we do need each other. So that sort of being able to make space to remember that and also practice that is very important. So I'm very interested in works and like projects that allow people to practice it, because we always talk about how Buddhism is a practice, right? You know, sometimes it's hard to you know, if you're not constantly immersed in it, you're not constantly like practicing the teachings, or even you know, having these interpersonal relationships, right? Not just with humans, but with the world, it's you lose sight of it, you know. So I think that's something that I try to keep in mind, you know, the reason why we keep doing these things and keep returning to it. Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah,
Thank you.
Jeremy wants to share.
Jeremy, over to you.
So for me, my approach to compassion, or how I learned about compassion, both for self and for others, is through volunteerism, because since the start of becoming a Buddhist, learning about Buddhist teachings, one of the core values that were taught is, you know, you volunteer, and it became kind of sort of my practice, which is very difficult to define and very difficult to document. In the last 10 years, I've been looking at volunteerism as performance art, right? So through that, the experience of volunteering and working with different people, giving your time, giving your energy, sharing in different communities of different backgrounds, you start to not just develop compassion for someone else, but you start to learn to love yourself back as well. I mean, it's a two-way thing, right? Although there's no monetary exchanges involved in volunteering, but there's a lot of other things that's intangible that I learned throughout the last 10 years that brought me to where I am today, you know. So compassion exists within every small gesture, every small acts of people that not just speak, but they use their body to act in ways that it just smiles at you. All the action smiles at you, and somehow your heart just opens up. So yeah, so that's how I would describe it.
Thank you. So from this point, I just want to just add something. We have, as you know, the panelists know, and maybe some of the audience members might know, an exhibition catalogue that's coming out in February. It's probably a third way, 2/3 into the exhibition, but in it, so we've got several essays in it. My essay actually touches on the importance of compassion. So curatorially, for us, for me certainly, this project is a compassion project in the sense that we really are, you know, looking at, you know, how, you know, we could use some of the Buddha's ideas to sort of be more engaged in community. So there are these sort of intersection of terms. A lot of you, or hopefully everyone here will be familiar with Suzanne Lacy, very famous activist, artist in America. So she was involved in a project, a very big project in the early to mid 2000s by Mary Jane Jacob from Chicago, Art Institute of Chicago, which really influenced me in terms of looking at this intersection between Buddhism and contemporary art further. So there is actually a few kind of interesting sort of modern art movement and philosophical sort of directions that intersect with Buddhism and compassion. So one of it is activism, right? Art activism, not in a sort of political way, but in a way that, you know, you're looking at, you know, I suppose, you know, environmental aspects, you know, equality for people. And then if you look into, you know, post-human thinking, you know, the importance of the non-human, you know, that we should sort of move away from the sort of human-centric world. That all actually does intersect with, you know, we're not, you know, the center of the universe. You know, it's not all about the sort of humanist thinking, which again, like I said, intersects with, you know, Buddha's ideas of being mindful. I mean, you're being mindful not for, you know, for yourself necessarily. Yes, it's helpful for yourself, but for others as well, you know, so you can act in a way, you know, that's considerate of others. Yes, so at this point, because I realize it's already 3 o'clock, I'm going to, if the artists have no other points to add or questions to pose, do you? Anyone? Any burning questions or points you want to make? No? If not, I'm just going to open it up to the floor and ask if you have any questions at all. Any questions from anyone? I mean, you can put it in chat or... No? Any questions from anyone before we wrap up? It doesn't have to be Buddhism. It can be about any of the artworks, the concept of the show, or you can direct it to the specific artists. Okay, if not, thanks very much for everyone's time. Maybe we covered a lot of ground, I would like to think. So we've got no questions at all. And once again, if you are Sydney based, or, you know, you can get yourselves to the gallery, I would encourage you to do so. Of course, we've got the online experience that I just walked through with you briefly, but it's, as you know, quite different with some of the works to be in that space, because it is actually quite a meditative space, and some of the works actually invite you to sit down we've got a floor-based meditation cushion type work, or Alecia's care index as well, it encourages you to sit down and go through it intimately. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and don't forget to have a look at all the other very many exhibition program events we've got on from now until the end of February. So we look forward to seeing you at some of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachael.
Thank you. Can I just get the artist to stay on? Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachael.